All right. So for chapters 9 and 10, essentially you're looking at like the following scenario, right? Where like this is your business and you're like looking at how you take how we record money coming out, how we record money coming in. Okay? So this is chapter 9. We talked about recording money coming out. Chapter 10 is where we're talking about recording money coming in. Everybody's okay with this as a basic outline of what we've been talking about here over the last 2 chapters. So in chapter 9, you have 2 special journals. You have your purchases journal. And then we have our paid cash cash payments journal. In chapter 10, we have 2 special journals. We have the sales journal, and then we have the cash receipts journal. Okay. So in the previous situations where we hadn't been running in a merchandising business, in the last unit, our business was like a service business where we weren't buying and selling things. We were like buying and selling, or we were like selling a service, like come and mow my lawn or clean my house or whatever. Now we're running like a merchandising business, like we have a rack of jeans and we're selling jeans or something. So we have to buy merchandise and then sell merchandise, right? Everybody's clear as to like what's the difference between unit 1 and unit 2. So for chapter 9, if the transaction sounds like purchase some merchandise on account, and then there's some details, whatever, that's going to go into the purchases journal. Or if it says paid cash, and then some details, that's going to go into the cash payments journal. Can you guys try to focus in and pay attention here? I know that we didn't feel good about this last test, and I'm trying to go through and kind of recap and review the details of what's going on and try to provide some broader context to make these sorts of recording processes a little bit easier to understand by physically drawing a picture of kind of how this money is being routed and how to tell from reading the transaction where to put things. I ran out. Sure. So in the situations where we purchase merchandise on account, we record those individual entries into the journal, and then those individual recordings get recorded into the vendor ledgers. And when we total the purchases journal, those totals get recorded into the general ledgers. Usually things like the accounts purchases and the purchases ledger but typically these guys are the 4-digit accounts, and these are the 3-digit ledgers. They have account numbers, right? Each of the ledgers has an account number. So typically the general ones are the 4-digit boys, and the individual are the 3-digit boys. The totals go in the 4-digit boys for the most part. And the individual transactions go into the 3-digit boys. In the cash journal, again, we record individual transactions, and those go to the vendor accounts or vendor ledgers, and into the purchases ledger, depending on like what the transaction was. So if it's buying in, like you're buying from a, so AP is accounts payable, by the way. That's what the AP was. I was stumbling to come up with that. Depending on the actual transaction will depend on like where you'd want to record that. But you can also have like non-purchases, right? Because we can pay cash out for things that aren't buying merchandise, right? Like if you're paying your rent or paying a credit card fee or whatever, those would go into one of our expenses ledgers. You know, for example, like supplies or, you know, credit card fees or whatever they might be. You could have all kinds of different sorts of things. And then the totals then go into general ledgers. Such as like cash, accounts payable, and then PD. What was PD? I don't remember what I abbreviated that as. Anyway, so that was like chapter 9 in a nutshell. So the real key here that seemed like, again, a lot of us had issues with is like the ability to read the transaction and pick the correct journal. And then once you've got into the correct journal, getting that into the correct subledgers, right? So that is the idea in chapter 9. Let's look at chapter 10, which honestly I think should have been easier, because when you're running a merchandising business, the only money coming in is from sales, right? So there's not the possibility of like when money's coming out of the business, there's no expenses to pay. It's everything is going, all these monies coming in are coming from either direct sales or payments on accounts. So I think it should have been a little bit easier, but let's kind of outline the same thing here. So we look at the individual transaction. There's kind of two types. Oops, we're not purchasing anything, dum-dum. So the first type of transaction is where we sold merchandise on account. That means we're giving the person their stuff and they're going to pay us back later, right? And our second transaction is received cash. So received cash means somebody paid us actual money directly. Now that could be for merchandise, like here's some money, give me my stuff. Or it could be like, hey, here's some cash that I owe you for the stuff you gave me last Tuesday, right? You could get money coming in from paying for either one of those, either money coming in paying off somebody's debt that they owe you, or money directly for stuff you're handing them right that minute, as opposed to, hey, I gave you some stuff, give me some money later. Oh, here's your money later. Okay. So if we're selling merchandise on account, those transactions go into the sales journal. If we are just receiving cash, that goes into the cash receipts journal. Okay. The individual transactions are recorded here. And those go into we then transfer those from the sales journal into the individual vendor ledgers. And the totals from the sales journal then get recorded into our general ledgers. So that's like accounts receivable, sales tax, sales discount, all of those things. And again, if you're not sure, typically the system we've been working in, the vendor accounts are always 3-digit account numbers, and these general accounts where the totals go are 4-digit account numbers. Now the cash receipts journal, again, the individual transactions are going to go to the individual vendor ledgers. So again, those will be 3-digit guys. And the totals, when we total that journal up, those guys again go into the general ledgers. Those being cash, accounts receivable, sales tax, sales discount. And again, the general ledgers are typically 4-digit guys. So if you look at your test, grab a copy. Go ahead and turn to page 107 for me on your test that I've passed back. If you look at the transactions list there, the first transaction dated May 2nd says recorded cash and credit card sales, $2,200 plus sales tax $124 for a total of $2,324 TS9. What type of transaction was this? Is it selling merchandise on account or received cash? Received cash. So this transaction should go into the cash receipts journal. So if you turn to page 108, in the cash receipts journal, you date that May 2nd. What is the account title that goes here? Yeah, it's the check mark or the V. Very good, because there's not a specific individual vendor that this cash and credit card sales is tied to, right? This is just from the cash register in your store. This is from Joe Schmoes off the street walking in and buying stuff, right? Where is this going to be recorded? What type of money is this that we've received? Sales credit. And also we got some sales tax payable credit, right? And cash debit, right? All this cash coming in is going to go into the total of the cash. All the cash that we get goes into the cash debit, right? The parts of that cash that we receive go into the different credit columns. Everybody's okay with that? Okay. If I look at the next transaction then, May 4th, received cash on account from Malone Corporation covering S406 for $2,670 R506. What type of transaction was this? Received cash on account, right? So again, we're still receiving cash. It's going to go in the cash receipts journal. But what type of cash are we getting? This is paying back debt, right? Is this a new sale? No, the money they're giving us is for a sale that's already happened. Everybody's okay with that? Where are we going to record this credit at? Accounts receivable credit, because this is debt paid on an account. So it's a credit in the accounts receivable. Where else does it need to go? Cash debit. Those are the only two columns that happen here. Is this helping to clarify as we talk through the flow of these monies and like what this is actually means? All right. May 5th, sold merchandise on account to Sherman City Schools, $1,480 plus sales tax. Sherman City Schools is exempt from sales tax. S424. Where is this transaction going to go? So this is sold merchandise on account, right? So this goes into the sales journal, which is at the bottom of this page we're looking at. So we date it. The account debited here should be Sherman City Schools, right? And what are we recording this $1,480? So that's a sales credit, and it's also going to be accounts receivable debit, right? Every transaction has to have an equal debit and credit inside of the journal, right? In the ledgers, that's not the case. In the journal, every transaction has equal parts debit and credit, right? In the ledgers, that won't be the case because the accounts receivable debit goes into a different ledger than the sales credit goes. So those will be in different ledgers. The transactions in your ledgers will not have equal and opposite sale or debits and credits. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. You guys feel like you have the hang of this a little bit? Okay. So let's say now we finished recording these. Let's talk about now transferring these transactions from journal to ledger. Yes.
What does it mean if it says paid in full payment versus partial payment? Like, I saw that on the page.
So, like, if it's paid in full, it means that you just paid whatever the outstanding debt is, right? As in terms of a partial payment, if I bought something on account for $5,000 and I turn around and I paid like $2,000 this month and then $3,000 the next month, those are two payments in partial, as opposed to me cutting a check for $5,000 and paying my entire balance in one shot. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we've recorded all of this transactions into our either sales or cash receipts journals. And then we've totaled all the columns in both of those journals. Everybody's okay? So in the first transaction in our sales journal was the Sherman City Schools transaction, right? That we just talked about that happened on May 5th. To record that, I will go and I'll flip through and find my Sherman City Schools ledger, which is on page 109. And I will record that accounts receivable debit in the debit column, giving me account or a debit balance of that full amount, $1,480. Okay. We'll notice later on, nope, it wasn't for this account. Okay, so we did that. And then we continue doing that for every transaction in our sales journal, right? And then the totals in our sales journal, the accounts receivable debit, that total from that column is going to go into the accounts receivable ledger, which is on page 110. That'll go in as under the debit column, and we'll update our balance as in we have more outstanding debit owed to us. Tommy?
For the sales journal, is the accounts receivable debit and the sales credit the exact same number?
Unless they could be different. Because of sales tax, right? If I sum the sales credit and the sales tax payable credit, that should give me the accounts receivable debit. That should be the same number. But the sales tax can can make those two columns you said different. If some of the money is sales tax.
So, is if you have a sales tax, and then in the account receivable debit, is it the sales credit minus the sales tax payable credit?
So the accounts receivable debit is what that person has to pay you back. So they have to pay you back for the stuff they bought and the tax on the stuff they bought. So if I'm looking at the row, the accounts receivable debit should equal sales credit plus sales tax credit.
Can I show you this then?
Yeah, when we're done though, okay?
We're done.
Yeah.
What do you put as the item name for the ledgers?
So in the ledgers, where it has the item, what goes there? Nothing. There's no titles because the account name is on the ledger already. You're just recording individual transactions. So nothing needs to go in the item in the individual ledgers. That only goes in the journals. Okay, good question. Yeah. Sure. In the event that you did that on yours, I just drew a line through it and I didn't make a deduction for it. Lots of us did that. I don't usually mark you down for unnecessary information. I will mark you down for wrong information, but if you put stuff in there that you didn't need, like you wrote zeros where you didn't need to write zeros, where you could have just drawn a line through it, or you put you did May and you did it 3 times or something, I don't mark off for writing May more than once when you don't need to, or writing in an item name when there's no item name there. So I give you guys all that on a pass, which I feel like is probably fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Does everybody feel okay with how we're moving things from the sales journal into the ledgers? Right?
Can you go over the Sherman City Schools again?
Sure.
Actually, no, can you do the Blair Industries?
So on May 12th, we sold merchandise on account to Blair Industries for $2,690 plus some sales tax, right? So May 12th goes in the date. The account title is Blair Industries. The sale number is well, you don't need the S. You just write 425, but that's fine. The sales credit is the $2,690. The directions tell us 6% is the sales tax. I'll type that into my calculator, times 0.06 to get the sales tax payable credit. And then I'll add those two numbers together, and that'll be my accounts receivable debit. Because that's how much Sherman or Blair Industries owes me. They owe me for the goods and their sales tax on the goods.
So it'd be 2,600
Plus the sales tax, yes. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Should we talk about cash receipts journal now? Okay. So our first entry in the cash receipts journal was the May 2nd, which is the check mark. Where's the check mark going to go? It goes in the Yeah, I don't think that one, does that have to go anywhere? Let me double check that. I don't think that goes anywhere. I just have to double check that. Yeah. So that isn't tied to an individual account, right? It's not an individual vendor, doesn't have a name. That's not going anywhere. Where that's going to be accounted for is when we total the sales credits and the cash debits, that money will be accounted in the totals because it's not tied to an individual vendor. It is not moved anywhere in the ledger. So the check marks are just stay in the journal. They don't go to an individual account, which should make sense, right? So what does that mean about the post reference there? If it has a check mark for a title, the post reference will be a check mark on that also because it's not going anywhere. The second entry in our cash receipts journal was received cash on account from Malone Corporation covering S406 for $2,670 or whatever. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to find the Malone Corporation. And I'm going to record a credit of $2,670 in my credit column. And I'll update their debit so it's less. They owe me less money. They made a payment on their debt covering some previous sale that we made for them. That's what it says covering S406 means. It's just covering some previous sale. Now they bought stuff in the interim from there, so they owe more than just that, but that was probably their oldest invoice that they were paying. Does that feel okay? Okay. And I would proceed kind of going down my cash receipts journal, entering these individual entries into their respective ledgers. And then I have to look at the totals. So if I look under the accounts receivable credit, that'd be the first column that has a total that's not zero. I will find the accounts receivable ledger, that's on page 110. And in that, I'm going to record a credit equal to the accounts receivable credit total, and then update that balance to show that I have less outstanding debt. Does that make sense?
What'd you do?
What's that?
Wait. I'm sorry. Just I failed the entire back.
I know, man. Like most of us did. We're going to talk about what we're going to do with this in a second. Okay. So, yeah. Before I'm going to ask you to fix anything. I want to take some time and talk up through like how these transactions should be flowed and recorded, because a lot of us had trouble with this piece, right? So I want to make sure that before I ask you guys to make some fixes or to do something again, we're not gonna get the same result, right? And before I get bombarded by 20 questions all at once, let's at least like walk through and do a little bit of a tutorial in terms of like how to record these things and fix these things and what this process kind of looks like, so that you can at least get started. And when you get stuck, you know, like you can talk to each other and talk to me, and we've kind of built out a little bit of the procedure, at least better than what we had it when we took the start thing, right? Does everybody feel okay? That's kind of what we're trying to do. Okay, so the performance here was just like stinky enough to where we'll do something about it here in a minute. Is everybody okay? One of the biggest mistakes I saw made is that many of us never totaled our sales journal or cash receipt journal and never transferred totals. We had a hard time understanding like where the individual transactions get pushed, what ledgers those go to versus what ledgers the totals go to. That was one of the biggest mistakes that students made. So like if you didn't do any totaling on your accounts, basically page 110 was just a 0 for you because you didn't have any totals to record in there. That was probably the single costliest mistake for students, is they didn't total things, so they lost points on totaling them. And then that whole page was basically a 0 because they didn't have any of the correct numbers to put in there.
And then for the items, it's the same, you just don't put anything.
Correct. Yeah, the items don't get any names in with what we're doing. I imagine at some point maybe there's some stuff that gets a name for it, aside from like the balance, which is what you just give the initial entry for whatever the previous month's running balance was. It's just like, you know, first of the month balance and then whatever the debit or credit is in on that account. But I don't know if you get anything other than that. At least we haven't encountered that yet inside of ledgers, so. Okay. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is I'm going to give you chapter test B. You guys all did A, version A. You're going to get version B from me here. What I'd like for you to do is you can ignore the matching, true and false, the multiple choice. All we care about is the accounting problem. I'd like you guys to sit down. You can talk to each other, but work through this problem. Turn it in. I'll give you half points back on whatever you missed for your test. Okay?
Thank you.
Good deal.
That's huge. That's great.
Much easier than a
Dr. Cook, you just saved my brain.
Genuinely.
I got two. Actually,
A 13.
No, I got two. You got 32.
No, but like, you didn't even try though.
I mean,
Yeah.
I looked at it and I was like, I can't do this. Yeah.
I remember getting to this last part here, knowing I was doing it all wrong, and just slowly getting started.
Like, now I know how to do it.
we'll deal with you.
When do we take this back to?
What do you think is a fair turnaround date for this? Next class sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's spend though, we have a solid half an hour here.
Yeah.
Let's get started.